You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Shane.
I'm Owen.
Today we have a special guest. Say hello, Mr. Xaosseed.
Yes. You may know me from such infamous blogs as The Seed of Worlds, if you traipse the deep internets.
And don't we all? And we're here today to talk about every adventuring party's favourite thing, loot. Specifically, stuff you can steal from other RPGs. The various wonders that might be a little bit more plug and play than you originally think, or might give you some inspiration on how to house rule your game, or just organise your campaign better. So, as usual, I have a massive list. Does anyone want to jump in before I start listing off my massive list? And
are we focusing on mechanics, or are we going to talk about setting stuff to steal?
I say this is more mechanics, but setting stuff to steal is a possible future episode. I was going to start off with a system I sort of touched on the last time we did one of these last year, where I talked and extolled the virtues of the Blades in the Dark system and its Forged in the Dark brethren. We already touched on a few of the big ones like the flashback system, but Blades has a few other little tricks. And by tricks, a lot of these things, gentle viewers, will be stuff that seems obvious in hindsight, but through the act of one or two games making it a core feature, you realise a little better how important it is. And one of the big ones from Blades in the Dark is clocks. This is a simple system of you draw a little circle and you draw either 4 quadrants or divide them into 8 or draw 3 lines to make 6. And this is sort of a tracker of the number of levels of success or failure that the party needs to do before they achieve a thing. So it's essentially a sort of complicated task measurement system, but by dint of using it a bunch of different ways, it can act sort of act like a sort of GTA wanted level, because it gets up to 6 points, that's when the blue cloaks show up. Or is this like
do you want to know something that'll melt your noodle, Shane?
Oh, okay.
This was stolen from Wolfrup 3rd edition.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
The designer talked about it once on Twitter. He was like, I stole 2 things from Wolfrup 3rd edition. Can anyone guess what they are? And I was like, clocks and party sheets. And he was like, yep, because they were great ideas. No one was using them.
Yeah. Much like D&D 4th Ed, I feel like there's been a big swing back on Wolfrup 3rd Ed over the last few years, where people are saying, yeah, it might not have been the thing we wanted at the time, but actually it was a really interesting system.
It was definitely a first draft that kind of got out a bit early, but there was some good bones in that, and it's gone on to do good things in different forms. So
Genesis is
the core dice system, and some of the other stuff brought forward. Just cut out the cards, which was a pity because I love the cards.
Yeah. But just the simple act of breaking tasks up, this is often something that especially since a lot of games will have very binary pass-fail systems, and therefore it's very difficult for people to establish, well, how do I break up this complicated task? Like, we just keep rolling until the DM says it's good? Just the simple act of writing down, for definite, this is how hard this task will be, and maybe you write down another one saying, this is the amount of failures you can take before your, another consequence will happen. And as you do a whole bunch of things, you can essentially add hit points to a system which doesn't traditionally have hit points for most things. Blades in the Dark, player characters have wound levels, but for NPCs it'll just be either you have to get the narrative position to stab them in the back, or the GM will say, well, this is a demon-possessed 12-foot tall mutant sailor, so he probably can take 4 or 5 hits before going down. So, but yeah, just sort of the flexibility of writing down this is the countdown clock. Fill in things as you succeed or fail, and when it gets to the end of the clock, that means something happens.
I think that the real where I find them super useful is for managing the opposition off camera. And it's like, I don't have to be figuring out what exactly did the demon cult do to advance its agenda while the party was off doing something else. But more, the party paid them no attention and left them to their own devices. They've managed to scribble in a quadrant on their clock towards their nefarious plan. And if they go and interfere with them, they can stop them. If they go and try and do something that fails, maybe they color something in, but it allows you to kind of track, how quickly are people advancing their plans? How quickly is stuff happening in the background? And then which ones pop off at various times, without me having to do massive amounts of who went where, what happened, how did all that work? It's just okay, they were left alone. They got to do another segment. It's a nice, quick, easy way to have the background run itself.
They in Wolfram 3rd Edition, they did it for the whatever opposition you're facing, and they'd often give you a custom one for their pre-published adventures. So you'd have this cult track, and the cult would be up to stuff, and the players could see that the cult symbol was moving up, but they wouldn't necessarily know what it meant. But they know those guys are up to something while this is going on. And there would be events on the clock that when it hit a certain point, certain things would happen. And it meant that they had a little kind of gamey, okay, that's what's going on. Alright, that's not great. And another way that kind of clock mechanic was used for player progress is in Star Trek 2D20, where what they did was that in Star Trek you often have a science problem you have to fix. And the way they systemized it is everyone can use a relevant skill to roll against the test. And they basically roll. And the number of successes they do informs their effectively damage against the test. Mm-hmm. And you roll the dice and it goes, okay, I did effectively 5 segments of damage. This problem is 3 difficulty, which acts as 3 armor. So I do 2 segments of progress. And I can spend stuff to ignore the armor and get a breakthrough, or I can have a mini breakthrough and reduce the armor by 2 or something permanently. And it's just a little mini game you play to represent you tapping at computers and going, let's try and reverse the polarity of the baryon sweep.
Yeah.
And then implement a level 3 diagnostic to catch where the errors are. That's what you're techno babbling while you're doing it. It's fine, but it means you get there, you fight, try and solve the problem, and the longer it goes on, the more bad stuff happens. And that's just a little bit of, okay, we're trying to fix a problem, because that's what Star Trek's like.
Yep.
We got to fix a problem, and then let's do the thing to fix the problem. And it's a way to go, okay, rather than just going, all right, you fixed the problem. It's okay, now you got to roll dice and you got to make some justifications about what skills you're applying here. Can you come up with a theory and stuff? And basically one of the things you have to say is you have to come up with your theory of what's going on. And then basically the GM or you guys can vote for which theory is correct at the end that fixes the problem. So it's a nice little bit of kind of mixture of crunchy bit of play with also a little bit of kind of narrative editing on it. It's a good little combo.
Cool.
So stuff like that is worth taking a look at and stealing, because it can be a bit unsatisfying sometimes to be like, all right, we roll dice, we succeed, we're done.
Well, we thought that we also mentioned the invert of that, which was the gumshoe or lower finder, where you automatically succeed to get the pieces of the puzzle, but now you have to put them together and decide what to do. There is it eliminates the dice bottleneck and throws it kind of here's all the information. Now what do you do with all the information?
Yeah, I think maybe the gumshoe philosophy somewhat gets misinterpreted as the GM giving away all the answers for free, but that's not really what it's intended. It's that the players will get all the clues. It doesn't mean that they'll get the answers. They'll get the puzzle pieces, but not necessarily they'll have to figure out, well, what does all this mean? They're still going to have to do their, chalkboard or corkboard and lines business to sort of put it all together.
Yep.
And of course, there's a system of spending your skill points to get additional clues or to find a clue in an unusual way, or normally you'd have to go through X number of scenes to really track it down. But the fundamental thing is, like, if something is vital for the type of play you're doing, then the dice should not be a barrier to it. It's just that doesn't necessarily mean you're being brought the entire way. There's still a very important piece in the whole figuring it all out
question
thing.
I'm assuming you have all had that session where you as the DM, where the players have had all the pieces and yet have spent hours arguing about A, what's going on, and B, what do we do about it. No, even where they knew, where they were certain about what was going on, it was like, what do we do about it? 8 time.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're coming up with all kinds of very interesting side theories and side implications of stuff, that's not a terrible thing. It's when they're deciding to, essentially burn all their evidence and run away to the hills when they're 3 feet away from solving the problem that you might want to step on the brakes and say, wait, hold on. There's maybe a couple of logical leaps here. Maybe we want to review the evidence before we set it on fire.
Potentially.
But yeah, it's a fair point. It's like, hiding if the fun of the game is going to be that, clue solving or clue combining bit where you play with all your vital information, then having a chance to not get that vital information is very important.
You had some other interesting ones from earlier, Shane, remind me.
The other one from Blades in the Dark, and as I said, I've gone over some of the big ones last time, but one of the other final big things from Blades in the Dark is something called the Devil's Bargain, and this is possibly a bit more controversial because it's a system whereby you have a very small dice pool in something like Blades in the Dark. You're typically only going to have 2 or 3 dice for a lot of your rolls, and you have to spend stress if you want to get a second an extra dice, or someone has to agree to risk themselves in the roll to get another dice. But the GM has the ability to do what's called a Devil's Bargain, where essentially it's like there's an extra bad consequence will happen, but you'll get an extra dice. And this, I think, might be a bit more controversial because it's a very drama-driven mechanic. And in Blades of the Dark, which is very much based around that sort of high-stakes escalating problem, that could fit. But in another game, something that's very realistic or simulationist, having suddenly the ironic the ironic success that caused an extra complication to happen might seem very contrived out of genre.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one. The Devil's Bargain, as it is stated in Blades mechanic, I do not like so much. The kind of pause the action, let's discuss. Not super my favorite. The whole idea, though, of if you can push it, stuff like spellburn, stuff like taking ability damage to not go unconscious I like the idea of burning stuff you wouldn't normally be able to do to get a bit more action flexibility. Let's say I don't like or I like the high concept. I'm not sure I love the Blades in the Dark implementation because it's very native to the way Blades in the Dark runs, which, I mean, it is what it is.
The momentum and threat systems from 2D20.
Yep.
I have not read 2D20 in a long time.
So the way it works is whenever you succeed past a certain threshold in 2D20, 2D20 is that literally that. The core system is stat plus skill, roll dice, D20s. If you roll under your stat and skill, it's success. If you roll under the focus value, which is usually the skill value, if you have a focus, it's 2 successes, and 1 is 2 successes. And I can roll 2 dice, but I can also spend momentum from the pool to add extra dice in. So I can buy another D20 for 1, or I can spend 3 and get 2 D20s, or I can, for a total of 4 D20, or I can spend 6 and get 3 D20s for a total of 5 D20. And then roll that. And if I get success over, momentum goes back in the pool. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling pool of I build it up by doing stuff. But you can also add threat to, at the same rate, to buy extra dice. So you can go, GM, you can have a threat. And if you roll a 20, which is a failure or a complication, your GM can just go, something goes wrong, your gun runs out of ammo, or something else like that. Or they can just go, I'll just take the threat. And then later on, whenever the GM wants, you can spend threat to do stuff. So, for example, you can be like, okay, this fight is going interesting, but I'm going to spend 6 threat and add 3... lieutenant level, or like it's nemesis level, I think, NPCs to this fight. So 3 more bad guys show up. Go, let's go going. And it becomes this thing where you can fill the pool if you need to by adding in dice, but that also has its consequences because so it's a way to go, you messed up in some way, or you needed to push it in some way and you didn't have the resources, so you bought trouble with me later. I will cash that in later.
Yeah.
And that means at an appropriate time, you can go, bam, stuff happens.
Yeah, I think there's sort of an interesting element there. It's just like, in your case, that's very much not completely, but mostly a player-driven action. The player decided, I'm going to add this threat to the pool. I'm going to say, we got this fortunate contrivance in this early scene, but we're going to pay for it karmatically in a later scene. But that's a player initiated action, whereas Devil's Bargains are, the way they're written is ambiguous, but it's sort of implied that the GM will sort of be meant to see a situation for a cool Devil's Bargain and then slip it in as an option to the player, and then it's the player's option to decide, do I take this interesting thing which makes me more likely to succeed in what I want, but has consequences, or am I going to spend the next 10 minutes negotiating with the GM to get a bargain that I like, or either way. And
I like the GM gets something that they can use later, because it means that the game keeps rolling, and the GM just like, at an appropriate time, this will come back to haunt you. And that's way better than, I guess, I will think up an NPC to show up and, let's just do this later. Let's not break down the game to handle the fact that you wanted an extra dice in your roll or something like that. It's like, this is much more about, like, it kind of works in Blades because of the way Blades is sort of set of this, you're always doing a dodgy deal with a character you don't necessarily, like, 'cause that's what it's trying to emulate, right? You go down and talk to, Nick the Greek, and you buy some shotguns off him, but Nick the Greek's a squealer. So if someone goes and asks him, he's going to tell them, that's what you're doing. And yeah, that works because that's the kind of game it is. It's Snatch the RPG. Well, it's not Snatch the RPG, but it's kind of Snatch the RPG, or Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels the RPG. Certainly it's influenced by them. And that's the kind of thing it's going for. And in that, it's fine, because you're going around cutting. You can very quickly go, you buy a bottle demon off the demonologist, and that will help you solve this alarm problem. Unfortunately, it is a demon, and you're buying it from a dodgy demonologist, so stuff will come back to haunt you later, and that's grand. But I think I like a bit more, GM gets a resource. Well, I can use that resource later.
Yeah. So it's an interesting mechanic, but you have to think about the implementation and how it's going to suit the game you want. Owen, do you have any suggestions you'd like to throw into the pile?
Ooh, I like Advantage Loft and 2d20, which I've already spoken about. There's other stuff I enjoy from a game point of view. I thought that a kind of if you have a character with spell slots, even stuff like what Pathfinder did with focus spells, which are basically like, I can cast this spell and it's nearly a full power spell and I get it back if I had 10-minute rest, was quite a good little idea. That an upgunned version of a cantrip, like I've got my cantrips that I can cast every round, but I also have a bigger spell I can hit you with. Other stuff that's worth stealing, there is some clever kind of nearly meta-narrative stuff that kind of goes back in time and retcons a mistake into not a mistake. So there's some stuff on, I think it's Trinity, Aeon Trinity's new edition. There's a gunfighter power, so you're a supernaturally skilled gunfighter. Like you're a gunfighter ace, you're a pulp hero, like the guy who never misses, right? So its mechanic is when you shoot and you miss, you can activate this power. You didn't miss, it was a warning shot, and you do an intimidate instead. So it basically becomes, yeah, I never miss. And that could be a nice character fantasy for somebody, because they're never incompetent. They're just like, they intimidate the guy instead. That's good stuff from a player fantasy point of view, because some people want to play the guy who never misses. How does the guy who never misses work in an RPG? It's generally overpowered or bad. But like that way, it's like, yeah, he never misses. But I wasn't shooting you. Like, I didn't miss. I basically intimidated you instead, because I was like, not one step further. And that's cool, because it feeds into the player fantasy while also being slightly mechanically elegant. And I always kind of like, because I can build a character that never misses. And then you have to try and balance the fact that there's a character who never misses. Isn't like that can be a pain for the GM. So I like a little bit of kind of meta, a little bit of kind of, I always like a good meta currency. I always like a good one where I feel like, okay, I'm building up some resources and I can use them later or not use them later. And there's a ton of good games out there at the moment using meta resources as a kind of pool that you build up and you use at the appropriate time. It's good ideas stolen from board games and card games. The idea of you husband your resources and then at the right time you unleash your resources, and that's kind of cool. Good ones in Wrath and Glory, the group advantage system in Wolfrup. There's a couple of other ones worth taking a look at. Fading Suns uses a victory point one, which is interesting. Well, it's just called victory points. It's basically a pool of points you use to increase the effect of your abilities or your rolls, and you can save them for later. You can earn some and you can save them for later. And it's based on, because the game is sort of a quasi-medieval take on space fantasy, it's based on kind of medieval principles of economics, of kind of husbanding resources to spend at the lean season or when you need stuff the most. So it's kind of, it's sort of based on that, of like you save your victory points and the big turn, you cash your victory points in, you ignore your opponent's armor and you hit them really hard. That's kind of, I think that's nice in a game where you can build, even if you're not having necessarily a great turn, you might be building up resources to use for your big turn later on. That's cool.
Billy, do you want to go next? Or I think there was one both of us were sort of agreeing on, which was what the OSR would call the oracular power of the dice.
Yeah, yes. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm not sure that's a house like rule or something like that. It's more of an approach, which is kind of, let the dice let the dice fall where they may and allow more things than you might like. That allow many things to be randomly generated and sort of roll with them.
Yeah,
it's an approach. Like I use it a chunk myself to break out of things. Like I was mentioning earlier, like I have an Excel with a bunch of personality traits in it. So when I run into a new NPC, I just randomly generate. I got a peaceful, ambitious, critical guy, a cheerful, fiery type, a preoccupied, disruptive guy. And, just sort of like mash some buttons, get some stuff, and it gives you a seed that kind of breaks you out of like the stuff you'd come up with if you had no time. Be like, oh, look, it's yet another one of these things because I always default to them. So
like the one I used last time, for the last time we did this, was the reaction table to sort of kick a GM out of the concept of the orcs see you, they attack and fight to the death. Whereas if you use a reaction table, then most of the time the orcs will be suspicious and approaching you cautiously, trying to figure out what are you doing here. And then there's equal chances that they might actually want to talk to these weird outsiders, or they might want to just chop your head off. But by leaving it up to the dice, you create situations that you wouldn't necessarily come up with at the spur of the moment. But there's another old system for doing this, the morale check. I think we've probably touched upon this before in episodes about running away, but the idea of sort of semi-randomizing the behavior of a group of enemies, it can allow for a lot of different outcomes. Like, now, assume this, of course, as we've gone over before, there can be problems with certain players can just turn into rage mode if they see a goblin take a single step back and then, proceed to commit genocide. But assuming you're playing with slightly more reasonable players, like having animals turn and run randomly, or having a group of goblins just roll really well on their morale checks, and they're suddenly, what was just a random encounter, is suddenly a heroic last stand as they fight to the last to give the others time to regroup or whatever. And, sort of that sort of randomization of behavior as a sort of means to kick you out of a cliche mode. I think that has something.
Yeah, I think it gives what I like about morale checks. I use them is it's somewhat intuitive in that things you would expect to run away more easily than others generally do, but it's no sure thing. Like, if you lob a fireball into that large gathering of goblins, you may scatter them all, or you may suddenly end up with like a major problem on your hands as they all start coming towards you howling for vengeance. But you can cite it like it's not a sure thing, but it's still somewhat balanced towards like, okay, the things you would expect to happen will generally happen. So I do like morale checks that way, like reaction rolls, so not everything starts as a fight. And then morale checks for like, not everything fights to the absolute death, which I think those are both good for kind of making things feel a bit more, like it's it's an actual place where actual things live.
Yeah. Maybe not so much for, a highly tuned to Pathfinder combat, but if you're in a more explorative mood, then...
Well, Pathfinder has baddies with morale. Some of them retreat at low hit points, And the reaction table could be nice, and the morale table could be nice, because okay, let's roll. Set a threshold, then roll on the table and see what happens.
Yep.
And it lets some unpredictability to the combat, and it can lead some funkiness to the combat, and potentially it could even unlock a different ability sometimes in the bad guy in the combat, and it can be a bit more dramatic than just, let's see if he rolls away. No, he detonates his soul gem. He has a soul gem? Yeah, he won't use it unless he thinks he's about to die.
Interesting.
And that can become okay, this can be a little bit unpredictable then. This is not just an all good table.
Yeah.
You know, it's a custom morale table for a bad guy can actually tell you a bit about the bad guy from a game point of view, which is nice as well.
I think there's also a great aspect to it of, sometimes you don't want those guys to run away. Like, you want to take them off the board, not we scared them, they ran off. Okay, now they're out here somewhere, and what if we run into them again on the way back? What if they've rounded up some mates? We wanted to deal with them conclusively, and we haven't. Pooh.
Yeah. And then that's a wonderful way of getting some extra juice into your combat system.
I think if we're mentioning like interesting ones from that same kind of stable of stuff, I particularly of like random rules that I would suggest adopting. One I have great fondness for: shields shall be splintered, mail shall be rent, which is sacrifice your kit to soak a hit. Leaves you like down armor afterwards, but sometimes that's fine. And it's like, you can't do it a lot, and certainly you're not going to do it many times in a combat, but I like that you having that choice in that burning stuff you wouldn't normally burn to the circumstances demand it.
It is a good option to have of like, I will break this thing right now because it'll keep me in this fight, and I need to stay in this fight. Good stuff.
Yeah. General alternate ways to use things, or sort of kind of calamity mechanics. I mean, one thing is just like, maybe this is sort of getting back into the devil's bargain thing, but maybe this is a more mechanical approach. And again, it's the question of if it's a player or choice. It's like, would the player rather risk bleeding out on the floor until hope the cleric gets to them, or are they willing to lose their shield and potentially be misequipmented for the rest of the dungeon to stay up this round? So like the intent is to add choice to proceedings. It's like, what do you choose in this situation, and give more options and turn the act of I roll dice, you lose 7 hit points, turn that into something a little bit more interactive. But also it's relatively simple and what's the word? Diegetic? Or, like it flows, the mechanical effect flows from the fiction, as it were.
Sure.
Yeah, like it's just a neat bit of narrative editing really to go, I don't lose 7 hit points, my shield breaks.
Yep.
And then I look shocked from behind my shield.
Yep.
It's classic.
Yep.
And that's fine. Then you'd I guess you should start carrying a backup shield.
Well, this I have heard of. Then for people using that rule, it's then sort of like and all my players started carrying 6 shields. Or no, they would enter the dungeon with a stack of shields. Like, okay.
And a shield porter, a guy with a little wheelbarrow and a bunch of shields behind you. Pathfinder 2nd edition had put in shield block as a reaction and your shield takes damage. And that was it was like they had an action to raise a shield and you got the bonus to AC, and then when you got hit, you could use a shield block as a reaction. You could be like, I will take some of that damage. And at high levels, basically, most of the time, your shield will take 1 or 2 hits and explode into splinters. So it's like, okay, this can soak a hit or 2, and then I need another shield.
Yeah.
And my shield's really expensive, so it's not hard to fix. You just fix it in the next, in the minute between fights, you fix your shield up. But it's kind of nice as I can block damage with my shield. This feels shieldy. That's good. And then let them do the same with the cantrip. It's like, I can cast shield, and then I can block this, I can raise my AC, and if someone hits me, I can dismiss the shield, and basically it sucks most damage. And then I can't cast shield again for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Just options,
Yeah.
Good stuff to have. Makes hit point combat feel a little bit more interactive rather than just you chewing down. You're both chewing down numbers, and chewing down the other guy's numbers faster is better.
Yeah. Well, that was actually one we did mention was of like a gap or a place where house rules are probably welcome is the whole what they call like the save or suck stuff, where you have failed to save against stunning strike. All right, you may sit here now for your round while everything else happens around you, or you've been paralyzed, or there's all those other abilities which like absolutely knock you out. It seems like a ripe area for something equivalent of like, okay, you can claw your way back from a failed save by taking stat damage or something like that. I've not actually seen much in the way of like rule setups for that.
I've seen a few. One of them is 13th Age, has what's called a fight in spirit action, where if your character is like out of the fight, they're not making saving throws. They're just either in the previous room recuperating, or they're off on some side mission, and they're literally not going to be part of this fight. They could go, well, my character has great interaction with character B, so I'm going to give character B inspiring bonus for this round, and that's my action in spirit. Now, maybe that's the version in 13th Age is maybe a little weaker because they don't want it to be like, oh, you just got stunned this round. That just means you do nothing. Skip your turn. We'll get back to you in 25 minutes. But there are other games which try a little harder. Sentinel Comics, in much the same way as the card game is based on, has it if you are knocked out, you sort of flip your sheet over and you have your out action. And that is, a almost always useful option you have to go, right, I'm going to roll probably a single dice and it's going to help out in some way. So even though my character is technically out, I am still narratively or mechanically adding to this fight. Whether it's just assume that my hunter character was left some tripwires around on instinct and one of the enemy mooks just sort of tripped over them now, or you're assuming that, my unconscious form is inspiring my brave comrades to lift this train that's about to, run into an orphanage or whatever.
I mean, like, okay, so some of those sounded reasonable. Other ones sounded a bit like what? So I think I would like to... Yeah, okay, so 13th Age, you said. I'll have to check that one out.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a part of you have just announced there's going to be a...
It's probably time. It's a good system, but at this stage would appear to be a little creaky. It is well into its dotage as an RPG system at this stage. That doesn't mean it's not still perfectly playable, but people like new stuff.
And I think it's the space it's staked out is still like it's still the king of that mountain. Like I haven't heard anyone else do icons, and when they talk about, hey, you want to be like the big damn heroes, even more than 5e. 13th Age is what people mention.
Yeah. Like that's I said in the previous icons was the big mechanic we mentioned in the previous episode. The idea that even from level 1, your character is in some way connected to the big guns of the setting, and they're always going to be here to help or hinder you. There's one other mechanic from 13th Age we want to go over, and that's the escalation die.
Yes.
This is
good idea.
This is the dice that goes up every round, so that after a while, we're not going to waste, after like 5 rounds of a combat, everyone has got +5 to hit, because we cannot just run around everyone rolling 3s and this combat goes on forever. No, we have to speed this along, so the longer fight goes on, the deadlier everything becomes, and the more uses for the escalation die there are. And a whole bunch of classes can trigger off the escalation die, and it works for everyone, but some people will have special triggers that let them just get through the fight harder. So that's sort of the idea there, is that we have a sort of narrative momentum builds as the fight goes on, rather than it turning into a slog as we. That this goblin just has 2 points of AC too many, and we just can't roll to beat them.
Interesting.
Did you guys ever play Marvel Heroic Role Playing from Weiss and Hickman?
Nope.
Or Margaret Weiss Productions?
Was that the diceless one?
No, that's the diced one. It's the Cortex. It was later used for Cortex Plus. It had a Doom pool, which basically was every time you roll dice, if you rolled ones, the Doom pool starts at 2d6, and when you roll a 1, the GM can either add a new d6 to the Doom pool, or can increase one of the dice in it by 1. And the Doom pool can be used the same way you guys use your meta currency of hero points to do stuff. It can also be used to bring in reinforcements to fight the bad guys, to fight the heroes. Or if it gets to 2d12, the Doom pool can be spent to end the scene. And the GM narrates how the scene ends. So you can be like attacking and attacking and attacking, and then you've rolled a lot of 1s, and the Doom pool is up to 2d12, and the GM goes, okay, I spent 2d12 for the Doom pool. Dr. Doom activates his ray, stunning you all. You awake in shackles in the next scene. Go from there. That's basically like, yep, you let the Doom pool get too high, Dr. Doom knocks you all out, changes you up in his castle, and leaves you there.
And like, okay, so I either add a dice to the pool, or is like I'm incrementing it from like d6 to d8s, or like d6,
d8, d10, d12.
d10 to 12, okay.
So and that needs to happen twice, so that's like d10, d12, like 6 1s have to be rolled before you can do that. And if you're doing that, you're not using it for any of the other stuff you could be using it for.
Yeah.
So it's like this. It's like, wait, what? It's like, yep. If you mess around too much in a fight, the GM can just decide this ends this way. It can end whatever way the GM wants, but it's just basically it's like there's a time ticker on every fight. It's like, yeah, there's a point at which the GM just ended. It doesn't have to narrate it so the bad guy wins, but it's often like the bad guy captures you, and it's one of the few ways to reliably capture a player in any RPG I've ever seen, where the GM just goes, nope, GM flash, bonk. You guys are all knocked out. But shouldn't let the Doom pool get that high, guys. But I rolled so many 1s. Yeah, what can I tell you?
Yeah.
Let's just move the thing to the stately Doom Manor, where Dr. Doom is ranting at you for a bit, and then he leaves and you escape. Because that's what happens.
Yeah. As per the old comics, with 1 bound, our heroes were free.
Absolutely. How do we get out of this one? I have no idea.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's like the clocks, like the failure ticks towards it's all going wrong. I do like the you can try as long as you like, but the situation only tolerates so many failures.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that you're in a doom spiral or anything. It's that, there's a cost to rolling a dice. You cannot simply pick up your dice and casually toss them around willy-nilly until you roll 666s and victory is poured upon you, like ambrosia from the jars of angels. Like, you have to consider your dice rolls. You have to think about like what actually is going to help in the scene. Like, what is actually an effective tactic here? I can't just grab dice, throw until I sandpaper the problem away through attrition. Yeah. You have to consider your what each roll of dice represents, and is it going to be helpful in the situation?
Cool. Shall we talk through one last good idea?
Sure. Lay it on us.
Well, I mean, the one that kind of struck me is, I was shocked it was even declared as kind of brought up as a house rule, was the whole, you mentioned it like Dungeon World's fronts.
Yes.
But to me, that's just like, that's how you run things.
Yeah. Well, okay. To explain this to the people who haven't seen Dungeon World, the concept of the front is that it's essentially a faction description tool for GM. It's like you say, this is your faction, this is the faction's leader, and maybe their lieutenant, and then, of course, the overall faction goal. And then the idea is you give the faction its moves, like what it can do if the players start interfering with their overall goal, but also you put in what happens if the players don't stop them in a bunch of steps. And the trick here is that you explicitly write these as things the players will notice, and they're called like grim portents or such. And the idea is like if the players let time pass, you pick one of your fronts. So he says it's like the plague or the demon invasion or the embezzlement of all the king's gold. And if they ignore it, you pick one of these, and you have right in front of you, so it's like, all right, the next grim portent is the plague breaks out in the city of buy +1 swords. And the players will hear, oh, you're going to buy a +1 sword. Shame about that city. Plague everywhere. Half the population's zombies already. And the players are like, wait, but we need to buy +1 swords. How could this have happened? Surely our spending 13 sessions dickering around in a goblin hole couldn't possibly result in this. But the point is that the villain's actions are written in terms of that the players will recognize, and then they can make a choice on whether they're going to act on it or not. Now, maybe the first one is just rumors of orcs in the woods, and the players could say, "I don't feel like doing orcs this turn. Let's go, go down to the goblin hole and bully them some more." But then 2 or 3 grim portents down, the orcs are burning down the capital city, and refugees flood every town in the land, and it's a little harder to ignore at that point. And then, of course, they're one step away from the ultimate goal. And of course, you also have their moves, what they do if the players do interfere with them. So you have both what happens if the players interfere with them, and what happens if the players don't interfere with them, let them get on with their stuff, and you have it all in one handy spot, probably on like an index card or something.
Yep.
But as I said, this isn't really an original idea. It's just sort of a fancy framing of an idea that a lot of GMs would have picked up naturally. And as you said, Xaosseed, I think you said you were doing it this way back in the 90s?
Let's say... I think the thing, like actually hearing you run through it all there, I'm going to say is like the whole, that fronts can be things other than factions. Let's say that wasn't necessarily something I was doing. So let's say that idea of expanding it out is kind of cool and useful. And the systematization of it, like, it has grim portents, like this is what happens. This is how people notice. Those are kind of useful. Like, it's useful to have that structure, that workflow to kind of like, okay, here's how it's all going to pan out. But certainly it was definitely the way that I thought about here's how you make the world feel lived in, is like there are these big forces happening in the background. Like if the players decide to spend all of their time in the tavern, then, when they eventually sort of emerge to buy new clothes every 2 weeks, they will notice a difference because these things have been rattling along in the background. So I always figured like, that was how adventure happened in my world. It's like these things were happened and they would run up against bits of the status quo, and adventure sparked off by, as you're saying, like there's an orc migration. It's reached the outlying agricultural lands, and you can't get pork for your stews anymore. it's reached the main trade roads and like now the beer's cut off. They're here. They're at the city walls. That type of thing of sort of tracking what's going on, and what happens if players don't get involved in stuff. I find that much more interesting than, everything just sits there and nothing will happen until the players go there. Like some stuff can be set up as like Jenga towers that like, they're in an unstable equilibrium, like nothing will happen until they're poked and then they'll all come down. But other stuff like should be dynamic, should be in motion from, day zero. And then you ought to know like what happens if these things are left alone. It's a bit like the clocks idea, like we said earlier, but it's like who has clocks and what happens when their clocks complete is sort of this bit.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've stolen our loot bags of ideas are quite full this time. Indeed. So, of course, being the Robin Hood like scurrilous rogues that we are, we grant these boons we've stolen from better game designers and given to you, and we hope that these ideas will inspire you in your games, either to buy a new game, steal the idea and mash it into your own favorite system, or to tell us that such an idea is completely unworkable and you have a much better system coming in your forthcoming Heartbreaker or DM's Guild supplement. But whatever response you have, you can hit us up on our social media, our Facebook, our Twitter, or on our Discord. Links all in the show notes. But for now, this party's over.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.